Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to another free webinar from Smith School of Business. My name is Meredith Dalt, and I'm a business journalist here at Smith School of Business at Queen's University in Kingston, and I'm going to be your host today. Today's webinar, A Business Leader's Guide to Blockchain, Understanding Blockchain and How It Will Change the Way Organizations Operate. And I suspect I am not the only one here today with a few questions about this new financial world, and I'm very happy that we're going to be digging into it today. As always, today's webinar is presented by Smith Business Insight and by Queen's Executive Education. Before we get started, I do want to let you know that today's presentation will be between 40 and 45 minutes. I do hope that you'll ask questions as we go, and then we'll get to those questions for the last 45 minutes of the session. So get your questions in early and often. Use the Q&A button at the bottom of your screen, and we'll get to those questions, as many of them as we can, at the end of the presentation. It's now my pleasure to introduce our speaker, Dr. Erica Pimentel, an assistant professor of accounting at Smith School of Business. Dr. Pimentel's teaching focuses on financial accounting. Her research explores how technological disruption impacts the way in which auditors engage with their work. And she is a chartered professional accountant who worked in public accounting before entering academia, though we're very pleased to have Erica with us at Smith School of Business now. So Erica, I am going to turn myself off and mute myself and give you the floor, and you just wave and I'll come back on and we'll do Q&A at the end, all right? Oh, you are muted. First unmute and then
Great, thank you.
There you go.
Okay, thanks so much, Meredith. So I am just going to share my slides. So thanks to the folks at Smith Business Insight and Queen's Executive Education for facilitating this session. And thanks to all of you for being here today with me to chat about a topic I think is really exciting, which is blockchain. And so those of you that have been following the blockchain sphere closely will know that when people think of blockchain, they think of cryptocurrency, and mostly they'll think of Bitcoin, which was the first major large-scale application of blockchain. And while these are undoubtedly important applications of blockchain, there's many other things that we can do, right? Blockchain is fundamentally a technology, and we really don't know where it's going to end up. So if you can retain one thing from today's presentation, it's that blockchain is a bold and exciting technology whose applications extend far beyond crypto, and it provides an architecture that can revolutionize how we share data with parties across a network, and it flips the script on the limits of transparency, data security, and decentralization. And so while I'm going to share some blockchain applications outside the crypto space with you today, the truth is that we're really at the beginning of this technology's life cycle, and the future of blockchain is yet to be written. So let's jump into it with our first poll question. That should be coming up on your screen. I'll give you all a few seconds to answer that one. So do you currently use blockchain technology in your business? And we'll wait for those answers to come in. Right. So I'm sure the results will come up soon as more folks bring in their answers, and we still have people arriving as the session is just beginning. All right, so 78% say no, only 5% say yes, and some folks are just not sure. So that's probably reflects the reality that we see in businesses across the spectrum, where really this is something a lot of people are talking about, but are simply unaware of how to operationalize it. So hopefully I'll give you some ideas about that today. So I think a good place for us to start our discussion is to think about what a blockchain is, and more importantly, what are the primary characteristics of blockchain that make this a technology that's something worth following. So at the base, blockchain is a data storage architecture, and it operates on a decentralized peer-to-peer network. And so what makes a blockchain different from, say, a traditional database architecture is that no single party can unilaterally add, remove, or edit information on a blockchain. So rather, as illustrated in this diagram, if someone wants to add information to the blockchain record, they have to broadcast their transaction to the entire network, and the nodes on the network will validate the transaction in accordance with the blockchain transaction mechanism. So folks are going to go and check if this transaction is legitimate in accordance with this consensus mechanism. And there's really two major consensus mechanisms that are operating right now. Proof of work, which is the original Bitcoin one, was popularized by Bitcoin, where the people or the folks, the systems that validate transactions are called miners. And these miners compete to solve a cryptographically difficult math puzzle. The problem with Bitcoin is the more secure the system becomes, the more energy is required to solve these computationally difficult puzzles. So this is the argument that, well, Bitcoin is great, it could revolutionize the way we make payments. The problem is the consensus mechanism consumes as much energy as countries like Finland. So other blockchains have moved to a different type of consensus mechanism called a proof of stake. And recently Ethereum has announced it's moving to a proof of stake. So what's different here is that proof of stake is far less energy intensive and is more scalable for new blockchain applications like smart contracts. And so here the people or the systems that are validating transactions are called validators, and they put up or stake their own crypto in exchange for a chance to validate the new transaction. And the reward for validating transactions is a share of the new crypto that's created. Now, regardless of the consensus mechanism that's used, once a transaction is verified, it's combined with other transactions to create a block of data for the ledger. And now this, in my opinion, is really where blockchain wins the day. And this is really what makes blockchain special. So pay attention. As each new blockchain is added to the record, each block is time stamped. And I want you to look at my fingers and sort of think about these as individual blocks in a chain. So this is my new block that I'm adding to the network. It has in it what's called a pointer that is a reference back to the previous block on the chain. And if I try and change this previous block, well, this pointer is no longer going to be valid. And every subsequent block has a pointer back to the previous one. So if I change this block, then I change this block. If I change this one, this guy's pointer is no longer relevant, and this one, and so on and so forth. And so it's this interconnected nature between the blocks that are added to the blockchain register that is what creates this characteristic of blockchain that we call immutability. So immutability refers to the relationship between these blocks, that it's computationally impractical to change a previous block because you have to change every subsequent one. This is not to say it's impossible, it's possible. It's just computationally impractical to do so. And this cascade effect creates this data security that is fundamental to blockchain architecture. And then once the block is closed and the chain is beginning to be built, the transaction is broadcast to the record. All the nodes have an updated copy of the blockchain record in real time, and voila, a transaction is recorded on the blockchain. So now that we've gone a bit into the nuts and bolts of what a blockchain is, we can begin to understand what are these key characteristics and why they matter for business leaders. And so we just discussed this idea of immutability, or the idea that a blockchain is unchangeable. And so that's what makes blockchain really secure from a data security perspective, because you can have confidence that whatever it is that you report to the record will not subsequently be altered, changed, or modified. Now, beyond that, blockchains are decentralized, such that no single party controls a majority of the nodes or dictates the rules. It's really the consensus mechanism that verifies and approves transactions, eliminating the need for a central party. And so this really kind of switches how we think about the ways in which networks are governed. And so whereas traditional networks would rely on a central admin to have discretion over who can access a network and who can record information, that paradigm is really gone. Now, blockchain participants also transact across a distributed network, which means that nodes run a program that enforce the rules of the blockchain. And each node has a full copy of the ledger that's updated in real time. And so this is really when people say that blockchains trade trust for transparency, it's this idea that on a public blockchain, you can see every thing anyone else is doing and transacting on the blockchain in real time. And so decentralization and distribution together mean that I no longer have to have a central admin. This also means I can't take down the network by compromising one node. If I want to take down the network, I have to compromise 51% of the computational power of the network, which is called a 51% attack. So it's much more difficult from a vulnerability perspective to bring down a blockchain than it is to bring down the traditional network model that we're expected, that we think about. And finally, the last element that I would add of data security is this idea that members that transact on a blockchain typically are anonymous, and they're only identified by a set of string of letters and numbers known as their public key. Of course, in enterprise applications of blockchain, called a private blockchain, then we can and need to know who it is that we're transacting with. And those are like the supply chain applications I'm going to discuss in a moment. So I think now it's important for us to think about, okay, this is a really robust system. Now, why does it matter for me as a business leader? So let's get into that. The first supply chain application that I want to raise to you is a blockchains for supply chain. And the major advantage of blockchains for supply chain is that they can provide unprecedented transparency. And so one of the major issues in shipping and logistics is being able to track goods in real time. So where is something physically, but also ensuring that what you ordered is what you received. And this is especially important for items that have unique qualities like organic produce or conflict-free diamonds. So if you look at, this graphic that I have here, this shows a typical supply chain. And you'll notice that it's very fragmented, right? Each member on the supply chain is sort of blind to what everyone else is doing. So as the goods go from the raw materials producer to the supplier, the manufacturer and the distributor don't really know where the goods are on the supply chain. There also is, for any of you that have dealt with supply chains in your career, will know that there's a tremendous amount of effort that has to go into reconciling transactions as they move from one party to the next across the supply chain. So think about if now the supplier says, I received 100 units, and the raw materials producer says, oh, I sent you 120. How do they go about reconciling those things? It's resource intensive, it's very expensive, and ultimately these conflicts may or may not ever get resolved. And so what a blockchain does is, if we replaced, instead of this siloed type of supply chain, but rather provided visibility across the chain to all users at the same time, then say, the downstream distributor could have better visibility and better plan what's coming along in their pipeline as they know things are moving along. Now, some of you might say, well, there's reasons for obscurity, right? There's benefits why we don't know where everything else is. Maybe after the supplier is done, they don't want to see what's going on after them downstream in the chain. Or maybe, the supplier wants to protect their relationship, in my example here, with the raw materials producer, and doesn't want to be disintermediated by the manufacturer. A private blockchain and application architecture is very flexible, right? And so there are products out there that exist, these types of blockchain-based platforms that are used in supply chains where the designers can create certain types of obscurity, where we don't have to have full transparency as we would in, say, a public blockchain. And so really the way that supply chains create novelty by integrating a blockchain is this idea of unprecedented visibility, that the goal of which is to eliminate some of the very costly reconciliation and addressing errors and issues that tend to arise in supply chain context. And if any of you, I'm a teacher, I have to assign you some homework, are looking for further reading, there's a great article in the Harvard Business Review that goes into the nuts and bolts with some examples of how supply chains can change in the blockchain era compared to traditional areas. So I encourage you to take a look at that. Now, another non-financial application of blockchain is the area of digital identity. So they're called digital identifiers, or DIDs, which can be used for credential validation. So we now live in a world where we're often asked to confirm our identity. So if you try to renew your passport or even book a hotel room, you have to demonstrate, often by showing a government-issued piece of paper, that you are you. And so there's a few problems with this. First, Some types of government issued documents are inaccessible to people. There's always reports in different parts of the world where citizens are denied access to voting because they don't have the right type of card to demonstrate their identity. Now, the other thing is also that when you share your personal identifier with organizations, they keep a copy. And so there's a privacy issue that often becomes exposed. And I'm sure we've all received those emails. Your information is part of a data breach, and now your credit card information is available to all these nefarious actors. And beyond that, that can be used to create fake identities. So blockchains are available to help safeguard our identities in a digital fashion. And one proposal is to create what are called self-sovereign identities. And so under self-sovereign identity models, organizations can save a copy of their digital identity on a decentralized blockchain. And they can decide who it is that they give that information to. So let me give you an example. Let's say you're a Queen's grad, you just finished your master's degree, and you apply to a job. Now, if your new employer is going to want to validate your credentials, so they'll say, okay, give me your transcripts, or I'll call the registrar's office at Queen's to make sure that you were actually a student. An alternative in a blockchain-enabled world was that when you graduate, Queen's would issue a credential to you on a blockchain. They would have a signed digital document that would say, yes, this person graduated from Queen's with a master's degree in 2022. So when you subsequently go and apply for your job, you tell your future employer, hey, look at the blockchain. I have a digitally signed document that says I was a student at Queen's. I don't need to give you any more personal information, any more personal documents. You can rely on the blockchain that my credential is valid. And so the EU is experimenting with some digital identity and credential information. We'll see where that goes, but you can see how it also reduces the administrative burden of validating people's credentials and allows people to control when and how their identity is being shared, because they're not relying on a central party to validate their identity. Now, another application of blockchain is the tokenization of real-world assets. So as we can see with digital identities, the goal is increasingly becoming to replicate the real world online or on a blockchain. So another application is the tokenization of real-world assets, where we create digital replicas of assets like buildings, and we trade these digital representations or tokens seamlessly across a blockchain. So it's when we most commonly think of tokenization of assets, we think of real estate. So you have a building, and rather than owning an entire building, you take your building, save it on the blockchain, and make it into small pieces, kind of like shares, of your real world blockchain. Now, in my example that I have on the slide, another area that this has been explored is in the area of fine art. Think about why that would be, right? Art is very illiquid. It's very hard to get cash out of the Mona Lisa. And I don't think that's the Louvre's business model, but you can think of other pieces of art where it's costly for one person to buy an individual piece of art. So I can break up my piece of fine art into individual tokens and share it with other people. So you can create these digital representations that represent fractional interest in the painting. It also creates greater accessibility. More people don't need the whole startup capital to buy a whole Mona Lisa. They can buy a fraction of a Mona Lisa. It creates ease of access for otherwise cloistered investment opportunities and greater transparency regarding ownership. And I think this is really what wins the day. A lot of these assets like buildings or these types of fine art, we don't really know who the real owner is. But if I can see on a blockchain who are all the token holders of this tokenized asset, I can very quickly and very clearly know who's involved in this particular project. And this also means that in a world of decentralized finance, if I have tokenized assets, then I can use these tokenized real world assets as collateral for blockchain-enabled loans and other financing arrangements. So tokenization opens the door to link the digital and the blockchain world to inject liquidity and fractional ownership into new areas. And so the last example I want to discuss is building on this potential to tokenize works of art is that the blockchain has the potential to revolutionize creative industries by giving powers back to creators over ownership and copyright. So the image that I have here is a graffiti of the Bored Ape Yacht Club, which is a series of NFTs or non-fungible tokens, which became very, very popular. And these NFTs have raised hundreds of millions of dollars through their sales. So NFTs or non-fungible tokens are best understood as computer files that, combined with proof of ownership and authenticity, act like a deed, and they exist on a blockchain. So if you think of a traditional, like a Picasso, what is the evidence that I own the Picasso? And that it's the real Picasso, it's the canvas itself. So I could walk up to an art gallery and say, this is my piece of art. They're going to do tests on the paint. They're going to do tests on the canvas and say, yes, this is actually a real Picasso. But in the digital world, how do we, without a physical piece of art to verify, how do we check that this is the real deal? So these NFTs will be attached to a piece of blockchain code that certifies their authenticity and gives copyright to the holder. And I think what this opens up is a completely new marketplace for digital assets. And the most popular digital marketplace for NFTs is called OpenSea. So you can go check that out if you're interested in buying. A lot of these have become popular for avatars people have on their social media profiles. I think the other really interesting thing to ask ourselves is, what happens to the rights of the author after the piece of art has been sold? So you'll hear these stories of young artists who are up and coming, and they sell their first initial piece of art for, say, $10,000. And then 2 years later, that piece of art is resold at Sotheby's at auction for $1 million. And the artist, the original creator, does not participate in that secondary market of value. In an NFT is simply a smart contract. It's a piece of code that layers on top of a blockchain. And so the original creator has the potential to maintain a link, an ongoing link with that NFT. So for instance, they could add to that smart contract that they get a commission every time that piece of art is sold. The second and third and fourth and 25th time that piece of art is sold, they can maintain a connection to that piece of art. It actually exists in the real art world. It's called a droit de suite, but they're not really enforceable, and often they're very, very small amounts compared to the actual value of a piece of art. So the adding this layer of a smart contract not only gives the opportunity to maintain the copyright in the hands of the original creator, but also provides new revenue streams potentially for these artists. Now, the problem is that legal experts are sort of scrambling to understand how these things fit into existing copyright laws, because some artists have simply had their art copied and sold as an NFT. So this is really an emerging area. We don't really know where it's going to go. But the problem is that despite all these really cool innovations, there are many, many barriers to blockchain's ongoing success. And I think for the most important one, in my opinion, is information security and reputational issues. You know, I tell people I do a lot of research on blockchain, especially Bitcoin is the one that I research most. I get a lot of the question, is it real? Is it a Ponzi scheme? And, you know, Bitcoin, people always attach to Silk Road, right? They think of Bitcoin and they think, it's related with some type of nefarious actors. And there's always new frauds that are coming up in this space, right? Just this week, the failure of the crypto exchange FTX, earlier this summer, the failure of Celsius, it gives sort of fuel to this argument that, you know, it's all really a Ponzi scheme. So there's some serious reputational issues associated with blockchain. And more than that, it's these information security issues. So yes, there's hackers, but more importantly, blockchain systems are susceptible to coding loopholes. And there's nothing you can do about that, because when you write that initial blockchain code, you try to imagine what are all the ways in which this code is going to be used. And on the other side, you have these users who are trying to think, how can I break this code to take advantage of it? And so I think recognizing that it's people who write the code in the first place, and the blockchain, once it's in the user's hands, may take on a life of its own, provides this information security element that we really need to be cognizant of, that we are relying on code that may or may not be perfect. And that's something that's just inherently risky with blockchain. The second is scalability concerns. So one of the issues that happened with Ethereum is they got super popular as a blockchain, but as more transactions were being carried out on the network, there was congestion. And so this means that it takes longer and longer for each transaction to be processed. Now, one way to get around that is there's the possibility of side chains. So rather than everything being transacted across a main chain, things operate on the side, they get batched and then add to the blockchain. Okay, well, that addresses the scalability issue, but then we're not benefiting from all the security that we benefit from really operating on a blockchain. So, this is something that's still being considered of how do we address the fact that it takes a lot of time, it takes a lot of energy for a blockchain to be secure, and how do we make the system more and more efficient as these systems are being used more and more. Now, anywhere you go nowadays, you have the sign, we don't have enough labor, right? Labor shortages are critical across every industry, but they're especially critical in the blockchain industry. You need folks with very specialized knowledge, with a background in cryptography, with a background in computer science, computer engineering, to be developing these new solutions. And these people simply don't exist yet, right? It's a burgeoning area where new knowledge is being created every day. And as universities, we want to, equip the next generation of leaders, but we're trying to keep up as new knowledge is being developed. And so one of the real issues, I think, is going to be knowledge. But before we even get there, it's this idea that for blockchains to work, there have to be a critical mass of people who adopt the technology. So if you go back to my example of a blockchain on a supply chain, I may be an individual retailer who wants to implement a blockchain-based solution in my business, but it only works if the supplier is willing to jump on the blockchain, if maybe the customs officials are willing to jump on the blockchain, if my raw materials provider is willing to jump on the blockchain. And so until we achieve a critical mass of adoption, some of these are simply great ideas, but they're not going to be testable in the field until people actually adopt them. And so, new things are coming out, they're always being tried, but we really need to get companies on board with experimenting with these things to see what works, what doesn't work, and really achieve the future of blockchain. And of course, there's this issue of sustainability and energy consumption. So as I mentioned earlier, cryptocurrencies like Bitcoin use as much energy as some small countries. And so a lot of people who say, we're in a climate crisis, and here we are investing energy and resources in developing a payment system, a financial system that simply is unsustainable from an energy perspective. And so proof of stake is now becoming an alternative. So I think as new blockchain applications will emerge, new consensus mechanisms will also emerge, taking into account these energy consumption needs. All right, this brings us to our second poll question. And it'll give you a chance to reflect on these 4 blockchain applications that I just discussed and the barriers as well. So which blockchain application do you think has the greatest potential to disrupt business out of the 4 that I discussed just before? Very curious to see your answers on these. What do we think has the most potential to disrupt business? Give you all a few more seconds to get around this. Oh, we have answers coming in still. And we'll see which is the winner today. All right, so we have a pretty mixed bag. 24% of you think that supply chains will take the day. 39% think decentralized finance is the future, which I'm surprised because whenever we have these things like the collapse of FTX or the collapse of Celsius, people all say crypto is not the future. So I'm glad to see there's some folks here who still believe that it has potential. A blockchain for digital identity, 31%. And there are some real experiments going on, like I said, in Europe with this is the future and non-fungible tokens. Yeah, non-fungible tokens were very last year. But I do think that we don't know where these things are going. So great. I'm glad to have your participation in that one. All right, bring my mouse over. Here we go. All right, so now we're going to look at beyond commercial application of blockchain. Are there ways in which we can use blockchain to solve social problems? And so we call these the grand challenges, right? If you think about the United Nations development goals, they have different things that they prioritize are major barriers to sustainability of our society. And so I'm going to show you there's two ways in which blockchains have been suggested that they can address grand challenges. So the first one is modern slavery. So when we think of slavery, we think of people in chains that are shackled, that are being, almost like in this type of prison type of arrangement. But slavery is not just that. It's also people being trafficked, working in conditions like of forced labor, bonded labor, child labor, and things like that. So this map here shows you the incidence of slavery around the world. And you can see that, it's not gone and it still exists. And we as a society must do something to eradicate this, right? To let people live freely and work in humane conditions. So hypothetically, a blockchain could come in and help address modern slavery by offering a democratic system that gives control to a network of stakeholders to verify transactions and working conditions in supply chain, so that each stage along the supply chain could provide information about the working conditions at each site. So you can imagine where you might have a mine along a supply chain, and the mine would have to provide data on working conditions as a way to prevent or at least detect incidents of modern slavery. Now, although the ledger is tamper-proof, the problem then becomes the link between the material reality, what's happening in the real world, and what's reported on the blockchain. So garbage in, garbage out. So we don't want a blockchain to become a way to sanitize information and just selectively report what we want. We want to be able to use it to detect issues of malfeasance. So there's a UK-based company called Everledger, which is in the diamond mining business. And due to the unique characteristics of diamonds, each one has a fingerprint. It has its cut, its carat, its quality. And Everledger securely captures the defining characteristics of each diamond at their source and creates a digital thumbprint that is stored in the blockchain for each one. And so this provides a paper trail that allows you to verify the provenance of the diamonds and the provenance that they're coming from conflict-free, and their production is free of slave labor. So the idea is that by using the tamper-proof nature of a blockchain, we can use it to guarantee the provenance of certain items. I think one of the suggestions, of course, is to make a blockchain as decentralized as possible and to get as many stakeholders access to reporting things on the ledger as they occur to provide visibility, right? If people on the ground can report malfeasance as they see it, then the blockchain really becomes a democratic tool to give a voice to people. The problem, of course, becomes that not everyone has access to or has the sophistication to operate, to liaise with a blockchain, right? And so I think there's a lot of potential for blockchains to guarantee the provenance of items along a blockchain. I think it just comes down to having really rigorous controls at each one of these interface points with the blockchain to address the reality on the ground versus what's reported on the blockchain. We don't really just want to create another tool for sort of greenwashing, if we can use that term, or washing away some of these really, really important societal concerns. Another way that blockchain has been suggested to address grand challenges is in the area of carbon credits. And the World Bank has actually launched a project to use blockchain to register carbon removal projects and turn carbon credits into tokens for cryptocurrency investors to speculate on. So carbon credits, you may have also heard them called carbon offsets, represent projects that reduce emissions and remove carbon dioxide from the atmosphere. And so there are global carbon markets, which started with the Kyoto Protocol. And several international bodies have created these voluntary carbon markets. So you can see where I'm going with this. We could tokenize these carbon credits and people could trade them on a blockchain-based system. So there's two things that happen. One, we create a liquidity in the market for carbon credits, but second, we also create an immutable record for companies and their stakeholders to keep track of carbon emissions. And that, in my opinion, is the more important innovation here, right? For companies to report their carbon usage, but also for those systems to be tamper-proof. Now, the problem, of course, that emerges with these things is the nature of these carbon offset projects. So there was there was a story in Time magazine that if you want to read more on, and it looked at the story behind these carbon offset projects. And there was a token called the Toucan token, which was investing in these carbon offset projects. And they found that a lot of these projects were not really sustainable at all. They were not really investing in, creating new forests or replanting trees. And so there was some dubiousness, a bit of, difficult to describe stuff going on with these projects. So I think this is a really new area. There's an opportunity to create some visibility around the use and trading of carbon credits. But like everything, we need to be careful about how these systems are designed, how they're implemented, and how they're used. And so that doesn't mean that I don't have confidence in the potential of blockchain to provide a rigorous system to track and trade carbon credits. I think we just need to be careful that we look into the black box of how these systems are created. So I guess the next question becomes, well, where do we go from here, right? I've talked about different blockchain applications that can emerge. And I like to give the analogy of Web 1.0, Web 2.0, and Web 3.0. So when the internet was originally designed, right, Web 1.0, it was for military applications. And no one ever thought that we would go from military applications to e-commerce, and then now we would have Instagram. And so I kind of feel that we're in the same sort of life cycle with blockchain. We are now at a stage where there are cryptocurrencies, there are NFTs, there are blockchain-based supply chains, but where blockchain will end up, we really don't know, and we can really only speculate at this time. And so there's three sort of emerging areas they wanted to raise as sort of potential future directions. One is central bank-backed digital currency. So you may be familiar with Nigeria has the e-Naira, where they launched a digital version of their currency. Now that it's been maybe 2 years since this was released, very low levels of adoption. Similar if you've been following El Salvador using Bitcoin as legal tender, again, low levels of adoption. And I think Canada has looked at adopting a central bank-backed digital currency. And this largely isn't really going anywhere because I think we have to fundamentally ask ourselves, what are the problems with our current financial system that using a central bank-backed digital currency will resolve, right? In Canada, you can make payments fairly easily, fairly openly, interact, debit cards, credit cards, these things are very accessible. In certain parts of the world, that's a problem. And then a blockchain can come and resolve those issues. I think one of the major issues that detractors against a central bank-backed digital currency have is really privacy, right? Do you want the government to have a record of all of your transactions using digital currencies? Maybe yes, maybe no. And could there be limits on the ways in which you can spend your digital currency? So there's really some privacy concerns there. The second is linking to the Internet of Things. So when you imagine a blockchain-based supply chain, there's really an opportunity to use the Internet of Things enabled devices to send data to private blockchain networks to create tamper-resistant records of shared transactions. So think about freight, right? If I'm moving goods around, it may be difficult for me to keep track of any one item in the real world. But if I can attach an RFID tag to any one item that's traveling along the supply chain, it can update the blockchain in real time with the positioning of that item. And it's not just RFID tags. We can have IoT-enabled trucks that can give you the GPS location of your items along the supply chain. Other devices can give you the temperature or arrival times or status of different items. So as we put technology on goods in the real world, we can keep updating that blockchain record as things move along. And there's some major opportunities in supply chain that are currently being investigated. And finally, quantum computing. I didn't really go into it in the beginning in our example. I didn't want to go too far into the weeds, but the way in which blockchain transactions or information is written to the blockchain relies on cryptography. And so one argument is that we are at the eve of quantum computing, which could break the encryption mechanism that's currently being used when items are written to the blockchain. And so if we are on the eve of a new technology that could break the encryption of many decentralized finance networks, is this really the way to go? And so I think there's a lot of disagreement in the computing community about how close or far we are from the advent of quantum computing. So I think if we kind of take a step back from everything we've talked about today, I really just see this as an area of endless opportunity, possibility, a lot of which is untested, a lot of which is still emerging and is still being contested. And as companies experiment with these technologies, we'll see what sticks, what doesn't stick, and best practices will emerge. And I think what's really important for business leaders is sort of keep their finger on the pulse of what's happening, keep reading, keep listening, and think about how these technologies can be applied in your company. Now, I would say, don't do this blindly. A lot of professionals I talk to say, well, you know what? I have an ERP, it works just fine. A blockchain would be marginally better, but it's not worth the cost benefit. And that's constantly something we need to have in the back of our mind. So Meredith, that's it for me. I stuck to my 40 minutes and I think we can move to Q&A.
Fantastic. Thank you so much, Erica. There was so much in there and we have so many very engaged audience members, which is really fantastic. I almost hardly know where to start because they're all quite specific in regards to a lot of the questions you asked. Firstly, there were a few people who were really upset with how quickly you went through when you gave us our homework. You moved it along too fast. So if you want, I know there are a couple people, particularly that first piece of homework you gave us, there were people desperately trying to scribble that down and they missed it. So if you
I'll put that in the chat.
Yeah, if you want to throw that into the chat, people would be really happy. Okay, so look at her, man, she's fast.
But it says to host and panelists. I don't know if Meredith, you have access to make it available to everyone.
Yeah, okay, we'll figure this out, you guys. In the meantime, I'm going to get Erica started on a question. So you just spoke to this briefly, but if like Raj asks, a company really does want to start to figure out how to adopt or apply blockchain in their company or their organization, where do they start?
Yeah, that's a great question, Raj. So thanks for bringing that up. I think it's really going through your systems now and understanding what are your pain points. So I think there was a lot of hype, especially 2 and 3 years ago, that everyone wanted to slap on a blockchain everywhere, whether it was needed or not. And I think if you want to employ a blockchain, it's understanding which are the characteristics of data security, immutability, decentralization, distribution are value added to your business. And then saying, what is the cost benefit of a blockchain-based solution over what I currently have? And really making sure that marginally it makes sense to you. Because a lot of folks that I've talked to said, I have an ERP system, a blockchain would provide more visibility, but it's just not worth the adoption cost and it's going to take too long. I'm going to stick with my current project.
Right. And then realistically, if a person is part of a system and you were saying the other parts of the system have to also be engaged, how the heck do you do that in your little spot where you are in that chain?
So this comes down to the power of the different members on a network and how much negotiating and bargaining power do they have. So some of the tools, the supply chain-based logistics tools that exist now require people, you're required, if you have a certain logistics provider, a certain shipping company, you have to use their blockchain. And they are so central to that shipping network that they can compel users of their network to use it because there is maybe no other logistics provider that serves that geographic area. But if you are Walmart, you can compel your suppliers to join your blockchain because they have no choice. But if I am mom and pop hardware store, I don't have that power. And so there's these really cool, organizational dynamics, competitive dynamics that I think are fueling and perhaps encouraging or getting in the way of blockchain adoption in these types of systems.
Got it. Okay. And then in terms of cost, we've got a question from Solomon, which is, what's the cost of implementing blockchain technology? Do you have a sense
So
of that? Enormous.
I really can't give you a number because it really depends on what it is you're using. Are you using an off-the-shelf Hyperledger based product that could cost you a couple $100,000, or you're looking for something that could be millions of dollars because you need to get RFID tags to liaise with the Internet of Things. So it really, really depends. And also, if you are the one carrying the day, if you are Walmart and you are implementing the architecture that all your suppliers are going to get on, you're going to bear the cost. Versus if you are just incrementally joining someone else's blockchain, then the cost to you will be much lower.
Okay, super. Thank you. Oh my gosh, there's just so many good questions here, and some of them take us back to the beginning of the slides. So here's a question from Leo. What's the position of regulators, for example, government, on implementing blockchain in various industries and sectors?
Oh my. So where do we start?
We'll throw them all at you.
Okay, so it really depends on the sector. So, for example, in the financial services industry, the Canadian security regulators are really at the front of this, right? They have fintech working groups, fintech sandboxes that can give accelerated regulatory approval to companies in the fintech space that want to create a blockchain-based product. So if you want to launch a blockchain-based peer-to-peer lending platform, there is a whole regulatory accelerated method that you can use to get that moving fast. And securities regulators are really on board with. In Canada, we're very lucky. They really are on board with these things. Now, if you want to have a blockchain-based supply chain, well, that's different, because it's not just the Canadian customs agents you need to get on board, but it might be your suppliers might be in Peru. And so you need to get the Peruvian customs agents to get on board if you really want a holistic blockchain-enabled supply chain. So I think if someone wanted to have a blockchain-based product that was completely on board with regulators, I'd move into a financial product. We had the first regulated ICO, so initial cryptocurrency offering, in Canada in 2017, 2018. And there have been many others since then. So someone has already paved the way for you if that's something that you're interested in doing.
Okay, great. Thank you. Oh my goodness, Erica, there's so many. From Casey, blockchain and crypto seems like it's really an enabler of IoT and similar disruptive techs. Crypto is getting a rough start. Do you think if they pushed IoT first, crypto would get more adoption / love it? Love, as it would be necessary rather than a neat tech. Clear use cases versus future hope?
So I think we have to think about the history of blockchain, right? The original major application of blockchain was Bitcoin. And the purpose of Bitcoin, although the original white paper that Satoshi Nakamoto wrote was fairly politically agnostic, if you read his later works, he was very much a disruptor. And you have to think, when Bitcoin was released, it was during the Great Recession. And so people didn't trust the government. How come they let this happen to us? People lost their life savings, right, during that time. So crypto came first, and up until it was the use of Bitcoin on Silk Road, that is when Bitcoin became used. And it was only after Ethereum really said, hey, wait a second, we can do more with this blockchain thing. We can create smart contracts on top of a blockchain that can allow us to trade tokens, that can allow us to create NFTs. And sort of, we have to look at the history. So unfortunately, crypto came first, and with it came all the reputational problems, and it's a burgeoning system. The other problem is also crypto is sort of like ideological, right? It kind of got part and parcel with all the anarchists and people that want to disrupt the financial system. Whereas, hey, I have this really cool technology that's going to increase transparency and save costs. That's fairly unideological. And I can, to Casey's point, that's something everyone can get behind. And I think but I really think that is where the enterprise applications of blockchain are going to go. It's really in the area of supply chain and IoT, because I can convince a business leader tomorrow, hey, I can save you money and I can make things more visible and less error prone. Yeah, I can get behind that any day.
Right. Okay. Interesting. Thank you. So Michelle asks, what are the advantages of proof of authority, POA, as a consensus method for private blockchains versus POS or POW? Erica, I will ask you to help us understand Michelle's question.
So Michelle, I will be honest with you that I am a Bitcoin expert. Okay, proof of work is more my domain, so I'm not as familiar with these other consensus mechanisms. But what I can tell you is this: in a private blockchain situation, the designers can determine however they want the consensus mechanism to be. So do they want full transparency? Do they want to reward people with a piece of crypto? Do they want to reward them some other way? Is it just required to, validate a certain percentage of the transactions? It's really open in that way. And so the economics behind private blockchain are very different than the economics behind proof of work, proof of stake, or whatever. I think regardless, whatever method a company decides going forward, they really need to be aware of their carbon footprint, because they're going to get a lot of pushback if we start creating these big systems that are super energy consumers. At the base, though, we have to make sure that we keep data secure, right? Because there's no sense in creating a blockchain if it's not immutable and it's not secure. So suffice to say, to answer your question, Michelle, a little bit on the side there, I think really the sky is the limit in terms of how private blockchains want to organize their data validation.
Okay, thank you, Erica. I just want to let the audience know that we have opened up the chat and put the link to that homework reading in there. So you guys should be able to see that now. Jolanta's got a question, which I think maybe is applicable in a broad, a few other examples, but she's asking specifically about who's on the deed of a house if you purchase it using a digital platform. If your name is on the deed to a house, then that means you're the property owner. Can we apply this to blockchain, to buying things in a blockchain setting?
So this is something that like lawmakers and lawyers are trying to make sense of right now.
Right.
Because if the asset in the real world, as to her example, is owned by person A, but then person A contractually decides to tokenize or create fractional ownership shares. Now, I'm not a lawyer, but I will tell you that these are issues that we're trying to decide right now, right? Which one has priority in terms of legal standing? Is it the deed that was given by the city or whatever, the government? Or is it this contract that people sign away their rights and give these fractional owners precedence? So I will tell you that the answer, I don't have an answer for you, because every jurisdiction is different. And these are, and as new blockchain applications emerge, new regulatory issues emerge. Like another question is, if I have a smart contract, Meredith and I bet on the weather tomorrow, and I tell her, okay, if it's 20 degrees in Montreal tomorrow, I'll give you $50. And so tomorrow it turns out it's not going to be 20 degrees in Montreal tomorrow. And I say, Meredith, it was not a smart contract, but it's not enforceable. How enforceable is a smart contract in a court of law? A lot of these things are yet untested.
Oh, right, of course. I've got a question just about, so the question of with the art example. So you're holding a piece of art. A person is buying an NFT, so they've got a digital reproduction of a piece of art. What is the point of owning that? That's what I'm missing. Like I understand the Picasso, I stick it on my wall.
Yeah.
But when I own a part of a work of art, or I own that little NFT of the Mona Lisa, what's the point of me owning that? Is it simply as an investment?
Well, buying a piece of the Mona Lisa, yes, is an ownership, is an investment. And there's marketplaces for this where, art is a speculative asset in of itself. And so it's just to diversify into new areas. The other thing is really an appreciation for digital art forms, right? NFTs are creating new forms of art and bringing a lot of young creators, and they're creating digital images that we never would have seen or appreciated before. And people are consuming these pieces of art in digital spaces. So now if you go on Twitter and your avatar is an NFT, it's like a hexagon or an octagon, I'm not sure. And so you can, brand yourself as I am an NFT holder and user.
I have an NFT.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
So we have to think about how we're consuming things in this world differently. Okay.
For example, I'll just give a similar example in the metaverse, right? You can buy garments for your avatar to wear in the metaverse, or you can buy digital property in the metaverse. And you say, why would I want to do that? Okay, but some people have these, avatars in these applications like Second Life or in these spaces that they're creating second realities for themselves.
Okay.
And so it's really interacting with these digital assets differently.
I must be old. There's so many other ways I would spend my money. Okay. Roshan is very curious to know what your answer would be for that second poll question. You put up 4 questions. You asked us which you thought which was going to be the most promising in terms of a future. And so did you have an answer for Roshan?
Oh, my answer is supply chains. I think for me, it's the easiest one. It's one that's already being experimented with in many, many ways. And I think, frankly, for business leaders, it's an easy sell, right? You know that if I can give you technology, I can give you visibility that you couldn't get otherwise. That seems, and I think for also, it's the reduction of disputes. Because that is, as a former accountant, reconciliation is like a nightmare for me. So if we can eliminate the need to reconcile things, I'm delighted.
Okay, fantastic. They're all so specific, and also audience, you are amazing. This engagement is fantastic. So I guess keeping on the NFTs for a second, if the metaverse takes off, can you see NFTs being valuable?
Yeah, I mean, so I think it was, correct me if I'm wrong, I think it was Nike that was issuing NFTs. They were like drops, they're called airdrops, and you could just get like a random NFT, and you could get like the cheap one. It's like, you know, you go to McDonald's and they give you the Monopoly tokens on the side of your coffee. You can either get the random one that everybody gets, or you can get the highly valuable one. So some people were getting these designer airdrops, and they were, you know, worth $200,000 in the metaverse. And so it's really just a matter of creating a new class of assets that maybe I may not see value to, but another market may see value for. Now, the problem is when the value of cryptocurrencies go down, there's a lot of contagion, and Bitcoin often leads the day. So there's been studies in finance that say, you know, if Bitcoin's value suffers, then the value of Ethereum and Cardano and NFTs will also suffer. And ever since this summer, we've had one collapse of exchange after project, after fraud, that people are saying, do I trust this blockchain stuff at all? And that has dramatically hurt the prices of NFTs over the last, I would say, 6 months, at least since the summer. And so, you know, a lot of these things, people are investing in these speculative assets in the metaverse that may have been very valuable earlier this year are no longer valuable now.
Okay. So I feel like what I'm getting out of this whole presentation is basically, we're not sure. It's pretty promising. There's a whole bunch of potential problems. Stay tuned.
Yeah, stay tuned, and not just focus on financial applications of blockchain. Blockchain is more than crypto. And
yes, of course,
and I think that's really what I hope people to come away from today.
Okay, good. So that's your final thought. Because I definitely still have people popping up going, wait, I still don't understand. So, okay, so basically, I hope our audience is sort of further ahead now than they were coming in an hour ago. And Erica, you've done a really great job of explaining some of these terms. Audience, there's so many more questions here. We simply can't get to them all, which is unfortunate. For those of you who asked, you are going to be getting a recording of this presentation in your inbox. You will not be getting the slides, but you get to watch this whole thing again, slowly taking notes. Reading all of the homework assignments. So, so stay tuned for that. You'll be getting that in a couple of days in your inbox. And Erica, I just always need to do a little plug for our own programming. So I'm going to take a moment now, audience, to let you know that there are lots of learning opportunities here at Queen's available through Queen's Executive Education. There's a whole bunch of sessions coming up in the next few months, virtual and in-person sessions. So I'm going to encourage you to visit smithqueens.com/exec-ed. You'll see the link there for more information about these courses. They happen all the time. There are short courses, there are half-day courses, there are multi-day courses. So if you want to continue your learning, visit smithqueens.com/exec-ed and see what you can find there. In terms of free webinars, we do like to deliver those on a regular basis. The next one is coming up on Wednesday, November 30th. It's going to be about cybersecurity, called Auditing and Controlling Cybersecurity Risks. So that's happening on Wednesday, November 30th. Keep your eyes on your inbox for more information about that webinar. Erica, thank you so much for being so brilliant and for sharing your insights with us today. I know on behalf of our audience, we're all very grateful for having learned more about this important topic. And gosh, it's so great to talk to somebody who knows what they're talking about. So from Smith School of Business at Queen's University, thank you, audience. You've been fantastic. Thank you so much for your engagement. And I hope you will join us again for an upcoming webinar. everybody, enjoy your day. Bye.